The hull of the SS Arlington shudders, its steel plates screaming like a metallic beast surrendering to the crushing grip of Lake Superior. Nearby, on the rescue deck, 14 survivors watch in a paralyzing silence. As the bow plunges into a 650-foot black abyss, the mist parts for a fraction of a second, revealing a sight that will haunt them for eternity. Inside the sinking wheelhouse, a lone figure stands in absolute stillness. No panic, no desperate struggle, just a slow, rhythmic wave of the hand, a chilling valediction to the living as the glass vanishes beneath the ice-cold surge. What terrifying secret anchored him to a dying ship when the gates of survival stood wide open? Was it a final act of penance, a psychological collapse, or something far more sinister buried within the ship's final hours? Today, we peel back 80 years of frozen silence to decode the most disturbing enigma of the Great Lakes. Stay with us until the very end to discover why this man chose the abyss over the shore. Launched in 1913 by the Detroit Shipbuilding Company at their yards in Wyandotte, Michigan, the vessel that would eventually become a ghost of Lake Superior began her life under the name F.P. Jones. Originally designated as hull number 192, she was a quintessential product of early 20th century maritime engineering, specifically tailored for the burgeoning trade routes of the Great Lakes. By 1919, she was rechristened the Glencadam, a name she carried through the interwar years until the Matthews Steamship Company acquired her in 1936, giving her the final name that would be etched into the annals of tragedy, the SS Arlington. Shortly after this renaming, she was purchased by the Burke Towing and Salvage Company, an outfit that viewed the vessel as a workhorse for the demanding seasonal shifts of the North. Under the Burke flag, the Arlington spent her springs and autumns hauling heavy loads of grain, while during the slower, midsummer lulls, she was transitioned to transport pulpwood. The SS Arlington belonged to a specialized, now extinct breed of vessels known as canalers. These ships were never forged to withstand the unpredictable predatory fury of the open inland seas. Instead, they were meticulously sculpted to conquer the rigid, unforgiving constraints of the pre-1932 Welland Canal and the locks of the St. Lawrence River. Every inch of her steel frame was a calculated compromise between maximum capacity and unforgiving geometry. Measuring exactly 244 feet in length and 43 feet in width, the Arlington was engineered to slide through the canal's locks with mere inches of clearance, a feat of spatial efficiency that allowed her to serve as a vital, albeit narrow, artery for Great Lakes trade. However, this industrial efficiency came with a lethal built-in vulnerability. To maximize the volume of cargo she could carry through the shallow locks, her freeboard, the vertical distance from the waterline to the main deck, was staggeringly, almost suicidally, low. When her cavernous holds were stuffed with 2,100 tons, approximately 98,000 bushels, of Canadian wheat, the Arlington sat so deep in the water that only about 5 feet of steel separated the lake's surface from her vulnerable cargo hatches. In the sheltered, mirror-flat waters of a canal, this was a brilliant optimization of space, allowing for maximum profit per voyage. But Lake Superior is not a canal. It is a thermal predator that instinctively exploits such structural hubris. On the open water, the Arlington's narrow, low-profile frame turned her into a sitting duck for the Great Lakes' most terrifying atmospheric phenomenon, the Three Sisters. These are trios of massive rogue waves that strike in such rapid, rhythmic succession that a ship's bow cannot recover from the first impact before the second and third overwhelm the deck, flooding the hatches and sealing the vessel's fate. She was, quite literally, too narrow to maintain stability in a cross sea, and too low to stay dry in anything more than a moderate swell. The human element of the Arlington's story is as complex as her engineering. Following the conclusion of the 1,939 shipping season, the company made a pivotal change in leadership. The Arlington's longtime veteran captain was let go, and in his place, the Burke Towing and Salvage Company hired Captain Frederick "Bug" Burke. This was not a standard corporate appointment. Frederick was the brother of the company's owner, Edward Burke. By 1940, Frederick Burke was already a titan of the lakes, a veteran who had navigated countless gales of November and was respected for his iron-willed, albeit autocratic, command. Yet, on this fateful journey, his leadership was burdened by a silent, invisible, and far more dangerous pressure. The SS Arlington was more than just a ship. She was the crown jewel of his brother's company. In a tight-knit maritime community, still reeling from the economic scars of the Great Depression, the vessel represented the family's legacy, their primary source of wealth, and their reputation embodied in rivets and steel. Frederick Burke wasn't just acting as a hired captain, he was the guardian of the family fortune. Maritime historians and psychological profilers believe this deep-seated, tribal loyalty to the Burke name fueled a dangerous brand of professional stubbornness, explaining his often unpredictable, rigid, and autocratic command style. Every decision he made during the 1940 voyage was likely filtered through the distorting lens of family pride, a desperate drive to prove that a Burke captain could deliver his cargo through any storm, no matter the risk to the vessel or the crew. He was a man who felt he could not afford to fail his brother, making him far more likely to take risks that a more detached, objective captain would have avoided. The stage was set for a historic disaster on the evening of the 30th of April 1940, as the SS Arlington steamed out of Port Arthur, Ontario, the bustling grain hub now known as Thunder Bay, destined for the distant ports of Owen Sound. Before embarking on this final tragic venture, the Arlington had undergone a rigorous inspection. She was confirmed to be in excellent structural condition. A clean bill of health intended to carry her through the demanding 1,940 shipping season. As she sat at the piers of Port Arthur, the air was thick with the scent of harvest and industrial promise. Dock workers labored to fill her cavernous holds with approximately 98,000 bushels of high-grade Canadian wheat. This massive payload sat heavy in her belly, pushing her steel frame deep into the cold water until her freeboard, the critical space between the waterline and the deck, was reduced to a staggering 3-5 feet. In the calm of the harbor, she was a masterpiece of logistics. On the open lake, she was a vessel of diminishing margins. The Arlington did not embark on this perilous spring journey alone. She followed closely behind the SS Collingwood, a freighter that was significantly larger and more robust, designed to handle the temperamental moods of the Great Lakes with greater ease. In the notoriously hazardous waters of Lake Superior, this was the buddy system, a vital survival tactic born of centuries of maritime tragedy, where ships traveled in tandem to provide an immediate lifeline should engines fail, hulls breach, or the ice pack become an impenetrable wall. However, an ironic technological disparity existed between the two companions. While the Collingwood was larger and faster, she lacked advanced navigational equipment. The Arlington, conversely, was equipped with a directional finder, a cutting-edge tool for the era. Consequently, as the two ships ventured into the creeping gray veils of a developing fog, Captain Thomas J. Carson of the Collingwood made a pragmatic decision. He throttled back his engines, allowing the smaller Arlington to overtake him and take the lead, using her technology to guide them through the gloom. As they cleared the harbor, the two vessels exchanged routine whistle signals, a haunting mechanical dialogue that served as a solemn pact of mutual protection, echoing across the darkening, cold water. As the SS Arlington and the SS Collingwood ventured deeper into the obsidian heart of Lake Superior, they were unwittingly stepping into a meteorological death trap unique to the thermal dynamics of the Great Lakes. This was the peak of the Off-Season Gale, a treacherous transitional atmospheric window between late April and early May that transforms the world's largest freshwater lake into a chaotic battlefield of physics. During this delicate seasonal shift, the massive, deep volume of Lake Superior remains ice cold, a thermal memory of the harsh northern winter that clings to the depths, while the advancing spring pushes warm, humid air masses up from the American South. When these two opposing forces collide over the frigid water, the result is a killing fog of vapor so dense, cold, and suffocating that it effectively blinded the radarless vessels of the 1940s, reducing their world to a gray void where the only senses left were the roar of the wind and the rhythmic, metallic thud of engines. Beyond the catastrophic visibility issues, this temperature collision triggers violent, localized atmospheric pressure shifts, known to mariners as microbursts, which can transform a glass-calm lake into a frenzy of rogue waves within mere minutes. Although routine weather reports for the evening had optimistically predicted moderate weather and light seasonal winds, the reality on the water was shifting toward the lethal. The low-slung Arlington, burdened by her 98,000 bushels of grain, began to take the first hits. Waves, initially small but growing in frequency, began to board her, washing over the low deck and testing the seals of her cargo hatches. A professional rift began to develop early in the voyage. First Mate Junius Maxey, a veteran captain in his own right with years of experience reading the moods of Superior, grew increasingly uneasy. Recognizing the vulnerability of their heavy load, Maxey instructed the helmsman to alter course and hug the north shore, the rugged Canadian coastline. This route would provide a natural windbreak and a sanctuary of shallower, calmer waters, though it would be a slower, less direct path to Whitefish Bay. However, Captain Frederick Burke, upon learning of the change, immediately countermanded the order. With a stubbornness that would later define the tragedy, Burke commanded the ship back onto a direct, open-water heading. Maxey, sensing the danger of overconfidence, reportedly remarked to Burke with grim irony, "You'd think you were going to Whitefish." This was not merely a dispute over navigation. It was a clash between the cautious wisdom of a veteran and the rigid, perhaps ego-driven determination of a commander who refused to yield to the lake's early warnings. By 10:00 p.m. on April 30, the off-season gale had fully materialized. The wind rose to a screaming howl, and the lake was no longer merely hitting the Arlington, it was consuming her. Waves began to break over the vessel in a relentless cadence. When Maxey took over the bridge, watch at 12:15 a.m. on May 1st, the situation had shifted from concerning to critical. He watched with growing dread as the ship labored under the sheer weight of the water washing across the decks. His primary fear was the structural integrity of the cargo hatches, the only barriers preventing the lake from reaching the wheat. At 12:30 a.m., in a rare moment of coordination amidst the chaos, both the Arlington and the Collingwood reduced their speed to approximately 7.5 knots to mitigate the impact of the waves. Seizing the moment, the crew turned the Arlington's bow into the wind, a maneuver designed to stabilize the ship so that second mate Arthur Ferris could venture onto the treacherous, water-swept deck to inspect the hatches. However, the internal conflict on the bridge flared up again. Captain Burke, awakened by the change in the ship's motion, stormed into the wheelhouse. Ignoring the safety concerns of his officers, he ordered the ship back onto its original, direct heading and then, incredibly, returned to his cabin to sleep. The silence in the cabin didn't last long. By 1:30 a.m., the ship's distress was undeniable. Maxie, now desperate, pounded on Burke's cabin door, insisting that the captain take command of the bridge, while Maxie personally went out to inspect and attempt to repair the failing hatches. When Burke finally returned to the bridge, the reality of his decisions was laid bare. Hatch number 5 had failed. The steel and fasteners had succumbed to the hydraulic hammer of the lake, and the Arlington was actively taking on water, developing an ominous list to port. It is here that we find a tragic, haunting technical parallel between the SS Arlington and the legendary SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Despite being separated by 35 years of maritime evolution, both vessels shared a devastating Achilles heel: the failure of hatch covers to withstand the sheer weight and hydraulic pressure of Lake Superior's boarding seas. Once the lake water breached hatch number 5, the physics of the vessel changed instantly and lethally through a phenomenon known as the liquid wheat effect. Under normal conditions, grain is stable, but once it becomes saturated, it loses its angle of repose and begins to behave like a heavy, viscous liquid. As the Arlington pitched and rolled in the violent seas, the 2,100 tons of water-soaked grain began to slosh and shift with terrifying force toward the port side. Unlike a solid cargo that might shift back as the ship rolls the other way, this liquid grain stayed put, creating a permanent increasing list. This tilt pulled the already dangerously low freeboard even closer to the waterline, inviting even much more water to wash over the deck and into the failing hatches in a lethal feedback loop. Furthermore, wheat expands significantly when wet. As the grain absorbed the invading lake water, the internal pressure began to stress the vessel's bulkheads from the inside out, essentially trying to burst the ship like an overfilled balloon. The Arlington was no longer a buoyant vessel. She was transforming into a heavy, waterlogged anchor, a metallic beast drowning from within. Realizing the end was near, Captain Burke finally issued an order to turn toward the north shore, a desperate, too-late attempt to beach the ship or reach shallow water where she could eventually be salvaged. But the lake had already made its claim. The weight of the water and the shifting grain was pulling her surely toward her end. The internal struggle of the grain mirroring the external struggle of the ship created a doomed synergy. Captain Burke, still at the helm, would have felt the sluggish, dead response of the ship, the feeling of a vessel that has lost its soul and is merely waiting for the final plunge into the 650-foot abyss of the graveyard. The charade of stability that had sustained the SS Arlington through the long, agonizing night finally collapsed into a nightmare of structural failure at exactly 4:30 a.m. on the 1st of May 1940. Deep within the vibrating, grease-slicked and increasingly flooded bowels of the freighter, the mechanical heart of the vessel was failing. It was at this precise moment that the stokers, working in the humid, dimly lit depths, reported a catastrophic development. Hold number 2 was rapidly flooding. The invading waters of Lake Superior had bypassed the primary defenses, and the cargo was no longer just a payload, it had become a structural threat. As the moisture saturated the 98,000 bushels of grain, the liquid wheat effect took a more violent turn. The wheat began to expand with such immense internal pressure that the very bulkheads of the ship began to emit sickening metallic cracks. The rivets, those small steel pins holding the Arlington's history together, began to pop under the strain, sounding like distant gunfire against the roar of the machinery. Chief Engineer Fred Gilbert, standing amidst the chaos, bore witness to the ship's terminal gasps. The massive steam pumps, which had been screaming at full capacity for hours in a futile, heroic attempt to expel the lake, were now choking, sucking only a desperate, silt-laden mixture of air and water. The metallic beast was no longer riding the swells. She was settling into them, her buoyancy completely surrendered to the weight of the saturated, expanding wheat. Gilbert, realizing that the laws of physics had officially turned against them, scrambled up the steel ladders. His voice, strained and cutting through the gale, delivered the final harrowing verdict to the deck. The ship was foundering. Yet, as the alarm was raised and the reality of the sinking took hold, the crew encountered a psychological horror that rivaled the freezing storm outside. Captain Frederick Burke remained ensconced in the wheelhouse, gripped by a terrifying and inexplicable inertia. Despite the clear, undeniable evidence provided by the chief engineer and the terrified stokers that the Arlington was in her final minutes, the command to abandon ship, the sacred, absolute protocol of the sea, never crossed his lips. He sat in a state of catatonic calm, a figure of frozen authority, while the world around him dissolved into structural ruin. This created a haunting scene of cinematic contrast that has been etched into the annals of maritime history. On the tilting, wave-swept deck below, 13 frantic sailors were caught in a whirlwind of raw survival instinct. In the pitch-black darkness, their hands fumbled with frozen ropes and the heavy wooden blocks of the lifeboats. They attempted to deploy both of the ship's lifeboats, but the severe list and the icy conditions hampered their efforts. One lifeboat refused to budge, jammed by the angle of the dying ship, but through sheer desperation and frantic labor, the second lifeboat was successfully lowered into the churning water. Above them, framed by the dim amber glow of the bridge instruments, was the motionless silhouette of the captain. He stood in a state of absolute, frozen solitude, a sentinel at the gates of the abyss. While his men shouted and scrambled to bring the surviving lifeboat to the lee side of the vessel, the vital pocket of calmer water shielded from the wind and waves, Burke remained paralyzed. His hands perhaps rested lightly on the teak railing as he stared straight ahead into the black mouth of the storm, ignoring the pleas of his crew. By 5:00 a.m., the situation reached its absolute breaking point. With the port rail nearly submerged and the internal expansion of the wheat literally tearing the ship apart from the inside out, the crew realized that waiting for Burke's permission was a death sentence. In a desperate, self-authorized act of survival, they fully committed to the lifeboat. This was the moment where the buddy system that maritime pact made hours earlier in the fog finally proved its worth in the most literal sense. The SS Collingwood, under the steady command of Captain Thomas J. Carson, had been shadowing the Arlington's erratic, dipping lights through the gale. Seeing the freighter's silhouette tilting at a sickening terminal angle, the Collingwood executed a masterpiece of seamanship under duress. Thomas J. Carson brought the massive Collingwood as close as the violent seas would allow, expertly maneuvering his vessel to maintain that temporary lee for the Arlington's escaping crew. According to the official logs of the Collingwood, which was positioned only 250 yards away, the SS Arlington reached its end at 5:15 a.m. on May 1. One by one, the 14 men, including the chief engineer and first mate Junus Maxey, scrambled into the lone lifeboat and were hauled up the towering steel sides of the Collingwood. As they reached the safety of the larger ship's deck, gasping for air and shivering from the freezing spray, they turned back, eyes searching the doomed freighter. They were certain their captain would be right behind them, leaping into the freezing water to be pulled to safety at the final second. What they witnessed instead would become the cornerstone of Great Lakes folklore, a moment of pure, unadulterated, chilling mystery. The SS Arlington was now in her final, violent moments, her stern rising high into the air as the bow began its terminal slide into the 650-foot depths. The lights on the Arlington flickered once, twice, and then died forever, leaving only the pale, ghostly moonlight and the narrow beams of the Collingwood searchlights to illuminate the scene. There, still standing on the bridge, visible through the glass of the wheelhouse, was Frederick Burke. He had made no move toward the lifeboats. He had ignored the frantic shouts of his men, who had stayed behind until the last possible second, calling for him to jump. As the water reached the windows of the wheelhouse, Burke did something that defied every human logic of self-preservation. He looked directly toward the Collingwood, stood tall, and offered a slow, deliberate wave goodbye. It was a calm, rhythmic valediction that signaled his total acceptance of the lake's verdict. Moments later, the lake surged over the cabin, and the SS Arlington vanished. By 5:30 a.m., the survivors were safely aboard the Collingwood, but the man who had led them was gone. This was not merely a romanticized trope of Victorian literature. In 1940, it was a rigid, albeit unwritten, moral code that governed the identity of a master mariner. For a man like Burke, whose family name was synonymous with the vessel's ownership, the ship being the crown jewel of his brother Edward Burke's company, the loss of the Arlington was not just a professional failure, it was a personal and familial disgrace. To return to the shore and admit that his stubborn, irrational refusal to hug the North Shore for safety had cost the family their most valuable asset may have been a fate worse than death. Burke may have concluded that the only way to balance the scales of the Burke family legacy was to pay for the ship with his life. By choosing to stay, Burke transformed himself from a disgraced captain into a tragic legend. Some suggest he may have suffered a situational breakdown, a rare state of cognitive shock, where the brain simply shuts down and reverts to a fixed state of acceptance. Others believe the wave was a conscious act of penance, a final payment for the lives he had nearly cost his crew and the cargo he had failed to protect. He stood his ground as the metallic beast surrendered to the pressure, ensuring that the only person to pay the ultimate price for the night's catastrophic errors was the man who had made them. The Arlington didn't just take 98,000 bushels of wheat to the bottom. It took a man who decided that the weight of his honor was heavier than the 650 feet of water above him. As the Collingwood slowly turned away at 5:30 a.m., the witnesses knew they hadn't just seen a ship sink. They had seen a man execute his own final judgment in the loneliest, coldest place on Earth, leaving behind a mystery that would remain unsolved for over 80 years until the wreck was finally located in 2023. The structural failure of the hull, the popping rivets, the expanding grain, and the silent wave of a captain, all combined to form a narrative that is unique to Lake Superior. The Arlington remains a monument to structural hubris and the devastating reality of the liquid wheat effect. It stands as a reminder that on the Great Lakes, the line between a successful voyage and a maritime massacre is often as thin as a hatch cover or as fragile as a commander's ego. The 2,100 tons of grain and the single man who stayed behind now rest in the eternal silence of the abyss, forever joined by the cold, high-pressure depths of the graveyard of the Great Lakes. Burke's final act, the deliberate wave from a sinking bridge, remains one of the most haunting images in naval history, a testament to a code of honor that modern logic can barely comprehend. The story of the Arlington is not just a story of a sinking, it is a story of a captain who chose to drown with his mistakes rather than live with the shame of his failure. In the end, the lake claimed the ship, the cargo, and the man, but it could not claim the legend of the final wave. For over 8 decades, the tragic saga of the SS Arlington and the phantom wave of Captain Frederick Burke existed as little more than a ghost story of the North, relegated to yellowed newspaper archives and the fading, hushed memories of survivors' descendants. The ship had become a literal ghost of the Great Lakes, a mystery anchored in the unreachable, lightless depths of the graveyard of the Great Lakes. However, the veil of silence was finally torn away in 2023 through a remarkable feat of modern technology and a testament to the dogged perseverance of a single man. The catalyst for this resurrection was Dan Fountain, a veteran shipwreck researcher whose name is now inextricably linked with the Arlington's discovery. Unlike the high-budget corporate-sponsored expeditions that often dominate maritime archaeology, Fountain's journey did not begin on the deck of a research vessel, but behind a computer screen in a quiet study. For over 10 arduous years, Fountain meticulously pored over remote sensing data and bathymetric maps provided by government agencies. He was looking for a needle in 1,000 square miles of hay, or more accurately, a tiny, unnatural bump on the lakebed that refused to align with the undulating natural topography of the floor. This decade-long obsession was a digital hunt through the icy, deep-water records of Lake Superior, a search for an anomaly that everyone else had overlooked. His patience was finally rewarded when he pinpointed a promising coordinate approximately 35 miles north of Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula. In early 2023, Fountain partnered with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, GLSHS, to transform his digital coordinates into a physical reality. Boarding the research vessel David Boyd, the team utilized high-resolution side-scan sonar to sweep the dark floor of the lake. The results were immediate and breathtaking. At a depth of 650 feet, a region far beyond the reach of traditional divers, the sonar painted a sharp, electronic silhouette on the bridge monitors that sent chills through the crew. The unmistakable upright frame of a 244-foot freighter. To confirm that this was truly the long-lost Canaler and not just another anonymous wreck, they deployed a remotely operated vehicle, ROV. This sophisticated underwater robot was the only tool capable of withstanding the crushing atmospheric pressure of the abyss. As the ROV descended through the water column, The team above watched a grainy, live video feed in breathless silence. The descent felt like a journey back through time, moving past the killing fog and the violent darkness of May 1940, until finally, the robot's powerful LED lights cut through the suspended silt to reveal a looming wall of rusted steel. The moment of confirmation was visceral and profoundly moving for the researchers. As the ROV drifted along the hull, the camera panned slowly across the bow, and there, miraculously preserved by the oxygen-depleted ice-cold waters of Lake Superior, the name Arlington appeared in crisp white letters. It was as if the ship had been painted only yesterday, protected from decay by the very lake that had claimed it. The ship was remarkably intact, sitting perfectly upright on the lakebed, a steel monument to its own tragic end. Yet the most haunting discovery was the condition of the wheelhouse. Despite the violent descent and the immense pressure of 650 feet of water, the pilot house, the very place where Frederick Burke was last seen, standing his ground, remains standing. The glass windows have long since shattered under the pressure, but the skeletal wooden and steel structure where the captain offered his final, chilling wave remains a silent witness to his final moments. Maritime analysts and forensic historians note that the upright position of the wreck and the incredible preservation of the bridge are key to finally understanding the ship's terminal plunge. Because the Arlington was drowning from within, due to the liquid weight effect, she likely sank with a high level of internal stability. The water-soaked grain acted as a heavy ballast that pulled the ship down evenly, allowing it to settle onto the floor rather than capsizing or breaking apart in mid-water. This physical reality provides empirical evidence that reinforces the harrowing, once-doubted testimony of the crew on the SS Collingwood. The image of Burke standing firm at his post, refusing to leap into the lifeboats, was not a hallucination born of the storm's terror. It was a documented historical fact, now proven by the camera lens of an ROV. Today, the Arlington remains a protected underwater site, a pristine time capsule of 1940s, naval engineering, and a cold metallic grave. The wheelhouse stands as a permanent tribute to a man who, for reasons we may never fully grasp, chose an ancient code of honor and family loyalty over the safety of the shore. The discovery ensures that even 80 years later, the captain's final wave is no longer just a legend, but a tangible, haunting reality, resting at the bottom of the world's largest lake. For 84 years, haunting question has echoed across the cold, unforgiving waters of Lake Superior. Why? Why did a veteran commander, a man of such immense maritime pedigree and decades of hard-earned experience, as Captain Frederick Burke, choose to remain at his post, motionless and resolute, when the path to survival was open, clear, and mere feet away? The Arlington has finally been found, but the man inside remains the Great Lake's most enduring enigma. We want to hear your theories. Was it guilt, honor, or a mind broken by the storm? Share your thoughts in the comments as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the deep. Until we meet again in our next entry, I am Maritime Lore.